Development was far and beyond. The game was now in the oven for several years, and what was being made was the largest Zelda game yet. During Breath of the Wild's development, the team had crafted a massive overworld with mobile dungeons that can be tackled in any order, using a realistic physics and chemical engine with a story and rich cast of characters to bind it all together, all under the development tag of breaking the conventions of Zelda. And the game was finally about to be shown off for the first time to the public. However, as the game was being polished for launch, a major hurdle was about to hit development that could jeopardize the whole production. Top that off with ideas that were being changed, finalized, or even scrapped altogether, many of which found their ways into the data of the game. And so, in the final part of this 3-part series, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. If you enjoy this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell too to further support us and keep creating new videos. While the game had been in development for 3.5 years by June 2014, the public had only heard rumblings of a Zelda game for Nintendo's then console, the Wii U. The first mention of it happened at E3 2011, where General Manager Shigeru Miyamoto confirmed that there was a new Zelda game in development, while showing off a tech demo of a hyper-realistic Twilight Princess looking demo. Something that made fans uneasy on if they would stick to that look after the debacle that was Space World 2000, when Nintendo showed off a realistic looking tech demo only to reveal a cel-shaded game a year later, which producer Eiji Onuma quickly made clear that the demo is not what people should expect the game to look like. Which behind the scenes, the tech demo was simply an idea for a graphical style up to that point, but dropped in favor of a Twilight Princess and Wind Waker blend of art style to best represent the game's physics and world. Fast forward 2 years to January 2013, at a Wii U Direct, Onuma, who had now witnessed a confidently made engine in development, trickled further ideas about the game, including how it would continue to challenge the conventions of Zelda and let players tackle the game in any order. But the true reveal of the game came as of June 2014, Onuma now showcasing a massive cel-shaded Hyrule. If you could see it on screen, you could go to it, with this trailer completing with a new enemy called the Guardian chasing Link and Link fighting back with a mysterious new arrow. The gaming world quickly fell in love with it. Despite the series returning back to cel shading, fans loved the art style, loved the large world, and the newer concepts such as the futuristic looking arrow and mechanical enemy. In fact, the game was so beyond what anyone was expecting, some weren't even sure if this was Link, with how different he looked wearing that blue clothing and less rugged appearance, going as far as to think that this was in fact a female Link for a change. Something Eiji Onuma once again had to step in and clarify not to be the case. But shortly after, at Game Awards 2014, a further in-depth look of the game was shown off, with both Shigeru Miyamoto and Eiji Onuma at the helm of it, showing what was a well-developed but still very rough world in comparison to what was to come with the final game. While the general shape of the land was mostly there were still major land formations that were altered, such as the mountain paths being a lot less claustrophobic. These paths of trees being originally a lot more simplistic too, and not so varied. Going further, grass and trees in certain locations being either added later or removed. An entire Sheikah tower that wasn't there. Even a certain tower that existed early on was later removed. Ruin artifacts that hadn't been implemented yet. And ruins that did exist were further evolved and changed by the final game, which in fact Miyamoto pointed out how the ruins were a clue to a dungeon nearby. This being a clear hint to the upcoming mini-dungeons called shrines, where seeing such irregularities on maps could lead one to a shrine. In fact, the enemy placement in this area was completely different too, but the enemies of this demo did showcase the first set of combat on horseback with the bow, including a new technique of Link jumping off and shooting in slow motion at the enemy. What was pointed out is how the horse's AI had been built to now know to avoid obstacles on their own, much like a real horse would. The most interesting bit seen here is the inclusion of what appears to be a magic meter initially, which, if this was kept, would have been the third energy bar of the game, along with the hearts and the stamina meter. Either that, or this was just the stamina meter and how it looked back then. But the bigger point of interest here is how it was going to take advantage of the Wii U's power with the gamepad's touchscreen at your fingertips. It was set to clearly imitate the in-game Sheikah slate that Link would use. Therefore, when Link would use it to pin a point of interest, you'd move the gamepad like Link would move the Sheikah slate to do this. But on top of that, the map of Hyrule was right there on the gamepad at all times to be viewed on the fly, and with the ability to zoom in and out. A very handy tool without the need to pause the game in order to view the map, especially with how massive this map was set to be. But regardless of the fact, hype was through the roof for what was now the Wii U's killer app for a release in 2015, which Onuma confirmed once more in that demo. Something that wouldn't stay true, as one more teaser for the game was shown in November 2015, after a year of silence that confirmed that it was now coming out in 2016. Not so strange for Zelda games to get delayed, since that is pretty normal at this point with how development for these games usually evolves and expands. But 2016 was also not to be the case. One day at the offices of Nintendo EPD, an ominous email was sent by Eiji Onuma regarding Nintendo's next platform, the Nintendo Switch. And it was a simple email with a tall order of making this very Zelda game on the Wii U cross-platform with the Nintendo Switch, and on launch day at that on March 2017. At first, this prospect frightened the team, as porting a game usually involves a lot of technical adjustments for it to function. However, what Nintendo provided was a very easy to work with development kit, whereby not only did it make it easy to port a game to the Switch, but without even optimizing the game, it was running perfectly and in fact at a higher frame rate at that. What could have easily jeopardized the production if it was on any other console ended up making this now the perfect launch title instead for the next platform. However, being that this was going to be on the new Nintendo Switch, the team wanted the games to function identically. Therefore, giving the Wii U an exclusive advantage of the gamepad and all its functionality wasn't going to fly. In fact, the team initially even wanted to feature Switch exclusive features too, but with the idea of keeping them identical, that was scrapped too. But it didn't take long for the team to soon notice that simply being on the Switch was already enabling it to take advantage of the system's gimmicks. The idea that the developers had been building towards was freedom with this game, to play it any way you wish, explore anywhere, tackle the story in any order, build your own path. Now with the Switch, this freedom automatically extended it to real life. The very fact that every game could be played portably already gave the game a sense of freedom to choose how you wish to play it. Top that off with the freeform factor of the Joy-Cons and how you wish to hold and play the game with them, including holding them with your arms crossed. Along with some polish to the graphics and sound quality of the Switch version, these along with the system's gimmicks made it worthy of showcasing it as a Switch launch title now. And so development continued, with a clear date, platform, and pathway forward for the game. At this point, it was heavily around polishing and refining the game to launch. Of course, with the Switch now at play, the whole map system and any exclusive functionality of the Wii U gamepad was now being implemented into the game itself, with a combination of buttons to pop open the map menus and other related gamepad features, to using the Switch's gyro controls to imitate the gamepad's movements. As well, numerous characters started to resemble their final incarnations too. This as well as dungeons were being given their final design and polish, with some such as Va Nuburus initially having larger malice effects. But beyond that, the game's world was evolving. Many of the places that looked one way in concept were coming to life and changing appearance grandly. These include everything from the Great Deku Tree, who went through numerous phases and different branches, to many interior designs of the Great Deku Tree grandly changing, much of which was designed more in a residence manner for the Koroks, as opposed to being shops like in the final game. Speaking of Koroks, early in development, the game had a numerous amount of these placeholder pedestals pulled straight from Skyward Sword all over the map, whereby Link would go and collect an item from them. These pedestals were now evolving into the returning race of Koroks, who would give Link seeds that can be exchanged for weapon slot upgrades. Kakariko Village, which initially had at least 2 major design changes, was finalizing. One with a simple lowland, wood-heavy hut design, eventually coming closer to its Japanese look, but still in a very different layout. In fact, while coming to its final state, many details evolved, including the interior of Impa's home growing more claustrophobic. The frog statues in the village even had many designs considered for it. The sister town to it, Hateno Village, even had 2 radically different designs too, both initially being planned as farming villages from the get-go and only growing more complex until the final design they went with for the game. Akala Ancient Tech Lab, ran by Robbie, went through 2 designs, one with a more Sheikah tech-heavy design to it, almost looking dragon-like in appearance, the other looking more like a fortress, but with a tamed guardian that would greet you with a smiley face after removing its head. But weirder was how Robbie's ancient oven, Sherry, had a robot female Sheikah on its head originally that would move and speak to you. Well, this explains why his wife hated it. Terrytown, while not too different, had 2 very unsettling statues of Hudson himself at one point, near the entrance. The Zora domain especially went through several stages of planning, starting out in a more cavern-looking manner like an Ocarina of Time, before coming closer to the final game's appearance with an even more fortress-like appearance compared to the final games. Goron City started out quite simplistic in design, being like with the Zoras, appearing more like an Ocarina of Time where they had cave huts to live in, but also a massive minecart system running through the city. That and the 4 Hokages of Goron City being plastered on its mountain. This all evolving to being a bustling city with actual houses and traffic. Rito Village had 4 initial designs in fact, all of which made height a major factor for bird creatures to fly around. The first had a more elegant design to it, something that would have fit well with the elegant designs of the Rito then, having huts going from the bottom to top, hanging off trees like bird cages, along with an active windmill, likely to give them wind for flight. Another was a wildly different and not so mountainous one, but still retained a massive windmill design. The next 2, however, did start to simplify and appear more stone-like, much like the final game. But eventually by the final game, it was completely redesigned, and with the addition of the Divine Beast at the very top, to give it one very distinguishing look. Gerudo Town was surprisingly not too different from its final incarnation, save for the central structure, having one that was just a large building originally, 2 a massive gate, before coming to the 3 fountain designs of the final game. The map was also smaller initially, and had a different water pathway too. Eventually, it was expanded by quite a bit for the final game. However, Riju's room was going to be very childlike originally, with plushies of sand seals and bright colors everywhere. Clearly, they were gonna double down on her being a child here. Unlike the other towns of the game that greatly expanded, Lurelin Village was initially going to be a grand fishing village with several ports and a complicated design before it was shrunk down for the final game. The many runes that were seen in the 2014 trailer were starting to resemble their final incarnations, which initially many more different runes were considered, including this nifty leftover cannon. Going further with the ruins, the statue in Farron Forest went through several designs before coming to what we see in the final game. And speaking of evolving exteriors since 2014, Dueling Peaks was going to have a simpler, more climbable design compared to what we got by the end. The stables, while not evolving too much for the final game, had the horse head change a good deal, looking less and less like a detailed horse. The many Zonai towers in the game started out with plans to make them much taller, more detailed, and with a special dragon head before being simplified. The head especially being of key importance that the team would return to in an eventual sequel. With this being such a grand leap for the series, one that breaks all conventions, even the story and presentation weren't going to be tackled differently. Unlike the usual hero's journey that Link goes through to save Hyrule that is on the verge of falling, or fallen midway through, this time it is of a post-apocalyptic Hyrule. Hyrule was set to be destroyed by a calamity, and Link would wake up 100 years after losing everything to start over and bring peace to Hyrule. With this change, cutscenes were being planned to showcase what happened, and for that, the presentation of the game was about to change with the first ever inclusion of full voice acting for such scenes. Link would remain silent, but everyone else would talk. Onuma, when he first heard someone talking in the series for the first time, was quite moved, and wished for everyone to feel that. And so voice actors were hired for 8 languages, as this was going to now be a worldwide same-day release. The music was going to take a very different approach this time as well. Unlike prior Zeldas with grand musical symphonies booming through any area, this game was going to focus on much more ambient tracks to calmly let the player explore the world and add a certain authenticity to the environment of the game. Music and environments have been in a hand-in-hand approach since Ocarina of Time, when Miyamoto challenged Koji Kondo to make ambient music for dungeons to the point where one could even taste the dungeon with that music. This concept now being taken into the overworld even. As development was winding down, Nintendo officially showed off the latest version of the game at E3 2016, a trailer that showcased a culmination of the team's efforts. From the grand and varied world, the ability to climb and explore anywhere, the post-apocalyptic story, and on top of that, the subtitle of the game, Breath of the Wild. A fitting name considering how the game was about exploring and feeling the wild for the first time in the series. If the trailer in 2014 made people feel hyped, this took it to a whole other level with all that was shown off. As such, it won many awards as the best game of E3 that year. With launch approaching, several editions were being pushed for the Switch edition, a limited and Master Edition bundle. The special edition included a Sheikah Eye coin, a tapestry of the world map, a music CD, and a Sheikah Slate Switch case. The Master Edition, however, had all that, but also with a special Master Sword statue, a sword that Eiji Onuma even posed with prior to launch. In addition, a lineup of amiibos were being made for the game too. These would be used in conjunction with the game to receive various treasure chests that contain random items. As well, previous Zelda amiibos were being made compatible to unlock not only their respective game-exclusive costumes and Epona, but also the Wolf Link amiibo allowed one to summon Wolf Link to accompany Link 2. And so the game finally released on March 3rd, 2017 on both the Nintendo Switch and the Wii U. This being marked as the final game on the Wii U here. A grand way for the console to go out, selling an instant 1.5 million units in just a week, with 75% of those sales being solely on the Switch. A testament to now truly being a system seller, and the game that already was the Switch's killer app, despite being a cross-platform game. The reviews were also phenomenal, attaining perfect or near perfect scores across the board, and becoming 2017's highest rated game on Metacritic. Reviewers praised its open world design, and how freeform it was, many feeling that while it felt completely fresh, it still felt like Zelda 2, topping that off with how it truly broke the genre open and reinvented it. These being opinions that were also shared with the consumers. The Zelda team had truly accomplished what they had set out to do in creating a free-form open-world game that challenged the conventions of Zelda successfully. While Breath of the Wild was being enjoyed by the masses after having a lengthy and constantly evolving development, there were still many pieces to its development that remain questionable to this day. These being leftover content found within the game's data that points to bigger gameplay and story content that may have been cut out. The first piece is the single screenshot found here of Link, dressed in the game's Hero of the Wild outfit in front of Zelda in what is probably a flashback cutscene, doing what may be a ninjutsu spell. A very strange shot, as none of this makes sense from a final game standpoint. Outside of the Hero of the Wild outfit being in a beta form here, it could be theorized that initially Link was wearing this outfit in the past in a sort of classical adventure he was on, and thus looking the parts like in previous Zelda games, before the calamity hit and now wore the blue tunic we know. No idea of the ninjutsu spell though, but maybe it was training by the Sheikah here, who do use it after all, and Link may have been learning here? Another leftover piece is an unseen piece of dialogue from the goddess statue. If you have both your heart containers and stamina bar full, you get a message that you can't increase it any further. This being impossible to see, as you can't fill both meters completely. It is possible that this was going to be something you could do, but was dropped. Either that, or this was done as to not have the game crash if someone does manage it via a glitch. There were also several images for the Hyrule Compendium, which cover photos of enemies, items, and animals within it. 6 of which belong to large choo-choos, which normally don't have their own exclusive slot, as they are just read as just the same as their small variant, likely simplified for ease. A picture of Epona also exists, which the final game had no slot for, this likely being removed due to the amiibo functionality required to get Epona in the first place. An interesting one, however, being this picture of this Korok in Kakariko Village. Something that can't be done in the final game for the Compendium. As the Compendium allows you to track what has been entered into it, it is possible that the intention was to use a Korok image to track Koroks in the game, a feature that might have been considered for a later development. Otherwise, there were some beta fishes here too in the Compendium. A potential cut item also exists in the game in the form of ice cream. There is a Soul ice cream graphic found in the data that acts to replace any corrupt graphic in the menu if the game glitches. It is possible that there was an ice cream recipe planned at one point, but was removed because, well, I don't think you can cook ice cream. However, the biggest mystery in all of this surrounds the sword that seals the darkness, the Master Sword. Within the game, the Master Sword is the only weapon that can't be permanently broken nor dropped. However, there is evidence to say that this may not have always been the case. The first of which is the broken Master Sword as a standalone item that you can equip. Normally, when the Master Sword loses its power, it becomes simply unusable. But here, we have a variation of the sword that only has its power at 1. It is unfinished, however, as despite what it says on screen, it still delivers the same damage as the regular Master Sword. Of course, the concept for the broken Master Sword at 1 damage and equipable was something Nintendo would again return to in a sequel. The other bit on the sword, however, is that it was possible to drop the Master Sword. If one were to glitch the game and actually drop the Master Sword, a special message plays that says the Master Sword has returned to the forest. Which following that, the Master Sword flies to the sky and disappears. In this instance, it's clear that one would have to venture all the way back to the Lost Woods just to lift it up and take it again. It's pretty clear why this mechanic was taken out of the game in the end. But the Breath of the Wild story didn't end with the release of the game. With the game selling a ludicrous amount of copies along with Switch hardware, Nintendo still had further plans with it, this being in the form of downloadable content. A second for the series actually, if one counts BS Zelda on the Satellaview receiving story patches. This was going to be in the form of 2 expansion passes, the Master Trials and the Champion's Ballad. Releasing only a few months after the game's launch, the Master Trials released in June 2017, which added the level gauntlet of the Trial of the Sword, where Link goes through several floors of enemies with literally no gear to start, all for a reward of powering up the Master Sword to twice its strength. But on top of that came Master Mode, a hard mode for the game that would truly challenge the best of Breath of the Wild players, coming with enemies that were swapped out for a stronger and smarter variation of themselves, a new gold variation too at that, and their ability to regenerate health. That and platforms held up by balloons containing enemies with treasure chests that were spread out throughout the whole game. Otherwise, other various additions were made, including the Hero's Path that tracks where Link has traveled in the game, the Travel Medallion that lets you make a warp point anywhere, and the Korok Mask that alerts you when you are near a Korok, a potential carryover from the Korok slot that was cut from the Compendium. But the real meat of the DLC came from the Champion's Ballad. This added a whole additional story and dungeon to the game, taking the idea of Link receiving his own divine beast as the story, whereby Link has to go through several new shrines in various locations of the game, at the start of which Link begins with a temporary new item called the One-Hit Obliterator, which, as the name states, kills everything in one hit. While it looks like a short spear that works like a sword in the final game, it had a more sword-like appearance in the planning stages in fact. But the second DLC would also bring rematches with the Blights, using a set of items that are given to you, before tackling the new 5th dungeon of the game, with a Sheikah monk as the final boss. All of this being done while being shown new cutscenes involving the 4 champions of the game when they first met Zelda and were being recruited into the rank of champions. The reward for all this being the Master Cycle 0, which, while it has a horse-like structure that is fitting of Link, it initially had a wolf appearance as a concept too. Also fitting considering a previous iteration. To summon it, it would just phase into reality normally. But originally, Link in fact was going to hold a Sheikah ball of sorts that, when tossed on the ground, would turn into the bike. But with this, one can summon it almost literally anywhere, and do maneuvers that would be otherwise impossible on horseback. A truly worthy reward for such a lengthy quest. While this would be a solid place to end the DLC, and is in fact seen by many as exactly that, the team did in fact have plans for at least one more piece of DLC. While the Champions Ballad explored the past, this third DLC was to explore the future, continuing off from the ending of the game where Link and Zelda went off to rebuild Hyrule. This time being about finding Ganondorf, who was sealed off at the bottom of Hyrule Castle, but comes alive and raises the castle to the sky, potentially reviving an old concept art from the initial planning stages of the game, where Ganondorf was on top of a large floating island in the sky. But as Eiji Onuma puts it, when it comes down to technical things, DLC is pretty much data. You're adding data to a pre-existing game, and so when we wanted to add bigger changes, DLC is not enough, and that's why we thought maybe a sequel would be a good fit. And so this third DLC was cancelled, and instead promoted and severely expanded upon for an upcoming sequel. As the years went by, Breath of the Wild's legend was forged, becoming the best-selling game in the franchise, sitting at over 30 million sales on the Switch, becoming the 4th best-selling Switch game at that, winning several gaming awards too, and considered by many the best game of all time too. While most do enjoy the game, there were of course some who had felt the game was too different from a standard Zelda game too. However, the Zelda team at this point felt very confident with what they had created, and wished to keep pushing forward with this new open and explorable Zelda formula for the foreseeable future. As such, the third cancelled DLC was turned into a full-blown sequel called The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, a game that proved how hot the series has gotten with the legacy that Breath of the Wild forged, and also a game that I plan to cover eventually. So hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back with more Zelda and other games cut content and history soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you enjoyed the final product of the game, or if you wish any of the beta material stayed in the final game. So everyone, thank you for watching!